Would you like to ask me any questions about any of the things I've talked about? Or I'll ask you to say something about Platform 22 first of all. Who's got anything to say about Platform 22? Like arguing with anything that I said, or making the case forcefully for any of the points within that?
How do we get around this to actually do something that is useful to the world, but also be working in a good, reputable, like, design firm?
Yes, you have identified the difficult thing. I don't have the magic answer to the difficult thing. But I think in a sense the answer is to do with holding on to those original ethical kind of thoughts which you had at the start, and be aware that those things are actually valuable to your employer, because your employer doesn't really, it's like, you know, it's easy for companies to get drawn into doing things that are a bit shit. But companies don't aspire to be doing things that are a bit shit, really. And also those things aren't liable to be of great economic value because they're not very distinctive, and people eventually work out they don't like those things and they're a bit awful. So having the courage to hold on to that kind of ethical voice and saying, should we really be doing this thing? This doesn't actually seem very good. Couldn't we do it better? That's an important role which you can play, and which, it's one of those things where it's easy to say, oh, and your employer will value this. And you hope they will. I think in a sense long term they do, but when it's to do with particular people and relationships, then it can get more tricky, but I think you still have to try and hold on to that. Easier said than done, I know, and we're talking about a huge situation which cannot be solved easily, but yeah. It's nice that you're talking about these issues though within your course. I mean, it's good, so at least you're aware of it and trying to steer your way through.
What kind of, I'm interested in how we're defining kind of ethical, because when you said that you didn't think that most designers would want to do something unethical, you know, I'm not making a moral, I don't know enough to make a moral judgment that say an iPhone is unethical, but I know that some people do make the moral judgment that millions and billions of iPhones probably are, and I find it quite unlikely that most, you know, that a lot of designers anyway wouldn't quite like to design the next iPhone. So I'm not really sure, where are you kind of placing ethical?
For one thing, you've caught me out in terms of being very simplistic, trying to give a short answer to a complicated thing. It's all complicated things though, isn't it? Like at the point when you're just designing an iPhone and you think, well, this seems like a useful gadget, then that's true.
Is that okay? I mean, do you think that's all right? As long as you can't kind of see it as being palpably unethical.
No, I wasn't saying that, but I would say look, there's all kind of things that follow on, because like the way in which those iPhones are then manufactured is one of the key things that people identify as being unethical about them, of course. But that's a step further along from the point when you're dreaming up an iPhone. Yeah, there's endless ethical questions all along the way, which in a capitalist context are not always dealt with super well. Yeah, but
because I kind of take this as that question of like, actually, is it even possible for us to design ethically when we're not in control of how it's produced, what it does at the end? You know, can we ever say that we are ethical designers?
Since you're doing the Apple example, Apple does have its designer Johnny Ive right at the top, being absolutely essential to the whole organisation. And so presumably if he gave a very strong voice to doing things more ethically in terms of the manufacturing processes, then maybe that would, and that seems not to have happened. And yeah, I'm not trying to defend anybody here. Yeah, it's endlessly difficult, isn't it, within a capitalist context, where people essentially want to create expensive items for low amounts of money to make the biggest margin, which Apple does so successfully. Yeah. You're asking me to address huge global issues. It's definitely a thing to worry about and to keep an eye on. And what is, can an individual designer solve these kind of issues? No, probably not. But having the courage to have a voice about them would at least be important. That's all I'm trying to say, really. Anybody want to ask me about anything else?
I wanted to ask about creativity and encouraging people to be creative. And what sort of other context do you see for that thing? Because you mentioned libraries and you mentioned play, you mentioned Lego being used in business context, but do you see it in other places to be efficiently used?
Anywhere. So yeah, like the libraries was an example, the Cardboard Challenge was an example, Lego is an example. Lego can be used just within the lives of two people or in much more organised kind of settings. I'm interested in anywhere where you can sort of interject elements of more play and creativity to get people doing stuff, essentially. So it could be anywhere, obviously workplaces, obviously schools, other places. In a sense, I'm not worried where it is, I'm just interested in ways in which we can cause it to happen. But my answer would never be limited to, oh, it's this one and this one and this one. It would always be, anywhere is going to be good.
But do you see any potential, something that you think would be interesting to see them making implements, or you think any?
What do I think are sort of fruitful places we could be doing more of it? Again, maybe I'll go back to the libraries example on that one. And partly it's tragic because libraries are trying to find purpose for themselves in a world where people are trying to close libraries. But that idea of libraries as a platform which are going to bring together communities, we've got a long tradition of thinking of libraries as being a sort of central place for communities. All different kinds of people, young and old, actually do come together in libraries to do things. So libraries being repurposed, I think they should hold on to some of the classic stuff they do too. But repurposed for that kind of thing would be good. And then any other context, as I said, any other context where we can get more of this in. Education system is obviously a place where increasingly there's just this drive to tests because everybody wants to know how schools are doing, therefore you have to have tests, therefore everything is just set up to be driven towards the tests. So you end up with a completely dead education system where nothing interesting is happening because they accidentally wanted to be able to measure, well, you know, they purposefully wanted to measure how well these institutions were doing, and what it means is you end up with a system which is purely about coming up with numbers that tell you how that organisation is doing, which means that the learning is absolutely crap. And so you really need to revolutionise all of that. And there's a certain growing awareness that that is the case, but there's still such a push for people to be able to have some numbers to evaluate schools on that you end up with massively popular tests and massively boring educational experiences. So that's another one.
Could you expand a bit on how play and creativity are linked?
That's interesting in that my brain just goes, well, they're just playing creativity. And picking them apart would be difficult. There are differences within them. There's a certain thing that happens, I'll say something on the side of that, which I don't know if it exactly answers that. There's a thing that I like with a thing that gets called Lego Serious Play, for example. Well then, obviously it's got the word play in it, and it ought to be, you know, the things that we associate with play are about that sort of endless joy of just sort of like picking up random things, like, it's an aeroplane running around with all this kind of, those free kind of play kind of ideas that we have that we associate with children. It's quite different to some of the corporate stuff that gets called play, where you think, that's not really play, it's like people are being creative, they're coming up with ideas. I don't know if it's exactly the same as what I really think play should be like. But insofar as the word play encompasses that idea of just very freely trying stuff out. It's also about making connections with other people. It's also about kind of creating a sense of like an environment within me, which then I share with you, and we create this world together. That's kind of how play works in children. It's a matter of like, well, I've got this world and you've got that world, and how can we fit them together? Then that is actually quite a good metaphor for connecting people in lots of different ways, and it's a good metaphor for the way in which creativity can connect people. So they're highly interlinked, I think, and all good forms of creativity are going to seem pretty playful, I think. When creativity is firing on all cylinders, it's going to look pretty much like play. That's my answer on that one. Thank you all for coming along. It was good to see you, and I'll be hanging around a little bit if you want to come and ask me about anything myself. Okay? Thank you.